Hi guys, it's Riot from Night Riot Cosplays. Today I am continuing with the series that I started, which is Stray Kids X a ton of different cosplays, where I take outfits that stray kids have worn either in performances or music videos. I recreate them and then I cosplay a character that I've cosplayed before in the outfit. Yes, I said a whole series because let me tell you, I don't have a bias. So for me, if I'm doing one thing, I'm doing it for all 8 of them. So it's a series because I am going to be doing one outfit from all 8 of the members. Today I am recreating Seungmin's outfit from the Venom music video. I really think this is a really simple outfit for me to create. It's definitely one of the simpler outfits that I've made before. It's on the easier side of the spectrum when it comes to cosplays that I've made in my lifetime. But I still wanted to show you guys the process in case you were thinking of maybe recreating this outfit as well. And as I was thinking of, because I planned all of this ahead of time, so as I was thinking of who to put into this outfit, I decided that Alois Trancy, none other than Alois Trancy was the perfect character to put in this outfit. Yes, I'm cosplaying Black Butler in 2024. I do not care enough. Black Butler will always hold a special place in my heart when it comes to animes, and Alois Trancy in a whole holds a very special place in my heart as a character. I've said it once, I've said it twice, and I will say it again. Alois Trancy deserved so much better than what he got. So I'm hoping that maybe by putting him in this outfit into this whole series that I will give him better. You're so furry. You're dropping so much fur. Gosh. Do cats have winter coats? It's summer. Do cats have summer coats? That being said, I'm done with the explanations and we can get crafting. I decided I was going to start with the chain looking top that Seungmin wears underneath the jacket. To start, I go to my dress form and begin marking out where I want the sides of the vest to end. I just use masking tape here to mark the lines of the front panel. Ideally, and I think in the original photo, I would make this a whole vest with a front and back panel. But I knew that I wasn't going to have enough materials to be able to pull this off, and since the back wouldn't be seen anyway because of the jacket, I compromised and only made the front panel of the vest. Alright, you see all those diamond lines that I placed on my dress form with the masking tape? Yeah, ignore those. I thought that if I marked my lines, I would be able to assemble the vest easier. It was actually a lot harder, so I ended up taking the lines off anyway, but I always leave the outline. That's the important part. Anyways, with my lines placed, I can start using some chain that I had lying around to copy the outline that I made with tape. When I got to the corners, or some natural pivot points in the design, I would cut my chain and pin the chain down to my dress form. I'd also pin the new beginning to the same corner and then continue the outline. Lastly, to finish the outline, I take some jump rings at all the points where I cut the chain to reconnect everything into one big chain line. With that done, I can actually start making the diamond pattern part of the vest. This is actually a really simple process. I had some 2-inch safety pins left over from another project, so I decided to use them instead of buying a new square type of chain. My goal with this series is to use stuff that I have in my sewing stash before I decide to buy new materials. From a distance, it's actually kind of hard to tell that it's actually safety pins instead of chain, right? So I just started connecting the safety pins together with jump rings until I have one long chain of safety pins. Then I start connecting the pins to the main outline. I definitely recommend pinning the pins down in place and making the design this way before you connect the pins to the main outline. It's just easier to move everything around until you're satisfied this way, because the only way to connect the pins to the outline is with jump rings. And it gets annoying to have to open them and close them all the time because you're not happy with the way they're laying. Either way, once you've gotten the design connected to the outline, the hard part of the vest is done with. Now we gotta figure out how to connect the back so it doesn't just fall off on us. Like I said before, I was running out of chain and safety pins, so I had to get creative. I have a lot of this white braided elastic cord, so I tied the cord to the jump rings at all the pivot points using a fisherman's knot. Don't ask me how I knew what that was. Then I pull the elastic towards the center back of my dress form. I try to make sure that I also stretch the elastic downwards more, just to make sure that the elastic will be tight against my back. Then I pull all the elastic towards the lower back of my dress form and tie all the elastic together in an overhand knot. Again, making sure that I stretch the elastic so it will lie tight against my back. And with that, the problem of the back panel is solved. Yay! All that's left is the black beaded piece of the vest, but it's kind of hard to sew seed beads on safety pins, and if I thread them onto the safety pins, I won't get the shape I want, and I'll be left with spots where the top and bottom of the pins won't be covered. So what do? We turn to every cosplayer's best friend, hot glue. Start by laying some masking tape across the neckline of the vest, making sure it's a lot bigger than what you will need. Then I mark the center line of the neckline and start drawing out the general shape of the collar. I try to make sure that both sides of the center line are different, just so I can have some options on how I want things to lay. Then I take the tape off the dress form and place it onto some white paper. I also pick which side I liked more and start really refining the shape and edges of the collar piece in a different colored marker. When I'm happy with the shape, I take a photo of the design and bring it into Photoshop so I can mirror it and print out an entire collar piece. If you guys don't want to go through all that work, you can find a free PDF on my Patreon of the collar design that I used. Moving on, I take the printed pattern and tape it down to my workstation. Then I get some parchment paper or wax paper, whatever you call the paper you use in baking, that makes things not stick to the pan. And I tape that on top of the printed pattern. Finally, I start laying hot glue in the shape of my pattern. Every now and again, I will deviate from the pattern I printed just because I want to add more breaks so it's not just one big blob of hot glue. I make sure to add glue sections at a time so I can add some seed beads to the hot glue as well. This just makes it so we have some variety and texture around the collar. These are the same beads I used later to make the web design on the jacket, but the color really doesn't matter because once the glue is dry, we can start painting the entire piece black. Painting over hot glue usually takes at least 2 coats, even with black paint, so just keep that in mind. I wanted the collar to still keep some shine after the paint, so I came up with 2 ideas. I had this white mica powder I thought I could rub across the black paint, but it ended up not doing much, so instead I used this glitter spray I've had for years now and never been able to use. And that brought back the sparkle I was looking for. Once I was satisfied with the collar, I used an awl to poke holes in the edges and then used more jump rings to attach the collar to the vest. That finishes the vest, so I can move on to the jacket, which I honestly struggled to make despite sewing being my strongest suit, and this isn't the first time I sew this pattern. That being said, I am not a tailor by any means, and I am a self-taught sewist, so making a proper suit jacket was out of the question for me. Luckily though, I had this pattern I found a couple years ago that is basically a simpler equivalent to a suit jacket. So for the sake of my sanity, I decided to use the Mariana notched collar jacket from fabricstore.com. By the way, a full list of materials that I used for this project can be found on my Patreon for free, including a link to this pattern. This is a free pattern that, like I said, I got a couple years ago, and I think it is a staple in my cosplay pattern inventory. Most of the collar jackets that I need to make for my costumes are made with this pattern. The pattern just gets modified where necessary to fit the character outfit. So, Fabric Store has a blog tutorial on how to follow this pattern and make the jacket, but I find that sometimes it's hard to follow a blog pattern, so I'm going to give y'all a brief explanation on how to sew the pattern together in case y'all prefer to watch how it's made. Again, I did struggle with this pattern for some reason. I couldn't quite get it to sew right, so keep in mind that I'm showing y'all how I sewed it together, even if it's not quite how Fabric Store intended for the pattern to be sewn. I definitely recommend you refer back to the blog from time to time if you're watching this video with it, just to make sure that you are sewing it as well as possible. To start, I picked out the pattern pieces that I didn't need. I'm pretty sure that the jacket Seungmin wears has pockets, but I felt the jacket would look too busy with the pockets, so I left out the pocket pattern pieces and the welt pattern pieces. Then I cut out the rest of the pattern pieces on some black cotton fabric I had in my stash. If I had to guess, it's probably the Kona cotton from Joann, but I'm not actually sure because, like I said, it's been in my stash for a while. When you're cutting out the pattern pieces, you want to make sure you're looking at the markings on the pieces and making sure you are cutting out the pattern on the correct grain line, especially with the collar pieces because they need to curve around your neck in order to lay flat. So make sure to check your grain lines and make sure you are marking your notches. I like to clip into the seam allowance at the notch point, but you can also use a marker, chalk, or pen to mark the notch as well. I also cut out the necessary pattern pieces out of lightweight fusible interfacing as well. The pattern will tell you what pieces need to get cut out of the fusible interfacing, so make sure you're reading what the patterns tell you. With everything cut out, I fused the interfacing to the wrong sides of the corresponding cotton fabric pieces. Finally, the sewing can begin. I start by pinning my front panels to my back panels at the shoulder seam, right sides together, and sewing down those seams with a 3/8 inch seam allowance. And then, because the pattern doesn't have a lining, I finish the edge using a serging stitch on my sewing machine. If you have a serger, I recommend using it, otherwise a simple zigzag stitch across the raw edge will work just as well. Next, you pin your facing pieces together at the short ends and sew them right sides together, making sure that the collar part of the pieces is facing inwards. Then you can press open those two seams. Don't worry about finishing the short raw edges, but you will want to finish the entire outer edge of the facing pieces with your finishing method of choice. Pin your upper collar to the facing pieces, making sure that the straight sides on the ends are left unpinned and that you only sew between the notch points. Once sewn, clip into the seam allowance and press it open. Repeat with the under collar, attaching it to the main body of the garment. Again, making sure that the straight sides are left unsewn and you only sew between the notch points. Clip and press open. The basic idea is to pin the facing to the main body of the garment right sides together and sew along the outer edge, making sure to pivot at all the corners. Don't be discouraged if it doesn't come out as clean as the photos on the blog. This is at least the 5th time I sew this pattern and I still can't quite get it right. Once it's all sewn in place, you can clip your corners to reduce the bulk when you're turning and turn everything inside out. I recommend giving the collar a good press at this point too to make sure that everything looks clean and crisp. Also, don't worry if the facing is too short for the main body of the garment. The original creators of the pattern did this intentionally to reduce bulk when you hem the bottom. Next, we can sew on the sleeves. My favorite way of sewing sleeves, and how they show you to do it in the blog, is to find the center point of the sleeve piece and pin the center to the shoulder seam on the main body, making sure that the right sides are together. Then pin outwards from the center on each side. It'll feel weird to pin and sew this seam because it's almost two opposite curves that you're trying to pin together, but with practice it does get easier. Once pinned, you can sew down the seam and finish the raw edge however you prefer. Then repeat on the other side for the other sleeve. With the sleeves sewn on, you can now close the side seams. Just line up the seams at the armpit of the jacket, the sleeve seam you sewed earlier, and pin outwards down the side seam of the main jacket body and down the center seam of the sleeve. Once again, after you've sewn the seam, you can finish it however you prefer. The last few steps for constructing the jacket are actually pretty easy. Roll hem the bottom raw edge and the two raw edges at the bottom of the sleeves. Start by turning the fabric under, wrong side to wrong side, 3/8 of an inch, and then again by 1/2 an inch. Then sew as close as you can to the folded edge for all the rolled hems. Now is when we can start taking that creative freedom with the jacket pattern to resemble the one that Seungmin wore. I bought this button cover kit from a local craft store, and I'm going to use a small bit of rose embroidered brocade to make some covered buttons that will pop against the jacket. The buttons are easy to use. You just cut out a scrap of fabric using the pattern provided on the back of the packaging. Then you place the fabric along the front. I made sure to center a rose on each button, and then just press the fabric into the hole in the back of the button. There's a bunch of hooks in the back that catch the fabric to make sure it stays. Once the fabric is placed how you like it, you can just press on the shank and then the button is ready to be sewed on. I repeated this 3 times because Seungmin's jacket has 3 buttons, but be careful where you place them on the jacket because the pattern only accounts for 1 button. Then I can mark where I want my buttonholes to go. I think it's easier to make the buttonholes first and then mark the button placement, but you can pick your poison. I don't really show how I sew the buttonholes, solely because everyone's sewing machines are different. I recommend you Google your sewing machine's manual online, and typically the instructions to sewing buttonholes are included. Once sewn, I just clip all of my loose threads and use a seam ripper to open the buttonholes. After they're open, I overlap the 2 sides so the side with the buttonholes is on top, and I place a pin in the center of the buttonhole going through the other side. Lastly, I just sew on the buttons to the jacket where the pins are. Finally, we are in the home stretch. All that's left is the beaded spider webs on the side. At this point, I recommend either pressing the entire garment so there are no wrinkles, or you can steam the jacket straight like I did. To start, I used some glass beads, also they might be called seed beads, that I got from Walmart. I picked up 2 packs in black and 1 pack in this almost multi-chrome color. I wanted some diversity in the colors because I felt that the plain black beads don't really go with Alois Trancy. But if you want to stay as close to the original garment as possible, you will only need black beads. When I was done beading the jacket, I had about half of a pack of black beads and a quarter of a pack of multi-chrome, just in case you go out and you're buying your materials so you know about how much I used and how much you need to buy. I also didn't want to follow any uniform pattern for the beads, so I grabbed a small container I had lying around and I mixed both types of beads in there so I could pick up multiple beads at random. You'll see how I do that here soon. I start by getting a long piece of black thread. I recommend using something a little bit stronger than all-purpose cotton thread, just if you get paranoid about the thread not being strong enough to stay. I also recommend either getting pre-waxed thread or waxing your thread just so that it doesn't get all tangled up as you work. I didn't do the waxing part, but there were multiple times where my thread was getting tangled, so I definitely recommend getting a wax to use. And you will need a slightly longer needle than what you would normally use. Thickness wise, the needle just needs to be thin enough to go through your beads, but the longer the needle, the quicker this process can go. Then I thread my needle and I pull my needle through the shoulder seam as close as I can to the collar seam, making sure that the knot is on the inside of the jacket. Then take your needle and stab it into the container of beads. It sounds weird, I know, but I promise it works. You want to make sure when you stab the container, you are going in parallel to the container and making a scooping motion upwards. Doing this gives you the best chance of picking up as many beads as you can and making sure they stay on the needle long enough for you to be able to thread the beads down the length of thread. I repeat this motion until my needle is mostly filled with beads, then I grab onto the top and lead the beads down the rest of the thread. If you want to make straight, tight lines, like the ones around the shoulder seams, continue putting beads on the thread until it is the length you want. Then to secure it in place, do a tiny stitch in the garment, making sure you face the tip of your needle towards the beads, similar to doing a backstitch. For looser lines, add more beads than the length needed to complete the line, once again securing the line when you're done with a backstitch. Lastly, to make the dangling beads at the end, you need to start with a new piece of thread, making sure you tie a tight knot at the bottom. Then, hold on to the knot with one hand and string a single bead on the thread. Lastly, pull the needle through the 2 pieces of string before the bead. This effectively secures the bottom bead and makes it capable of holding the rest of the line. String the rest of the line as normal, then do a backstitch at the top where you want the line to hang, making sure to pull tight and repeat the backstitch a couple times for maximum stability. When you are coming to the end of your thread, you just poke the needle through to the wrong side of the jacket and you finish however you normally finish hand stitching. For me, that is tying 3 knots by poking the needle through a little bit of fabric and then threading it through the loop that it creates. After some time, it became very therapeutic to just listen to the beads while you work. When I was beading my jacket, I really didn't mark anything to see where I would be placing my web. I just kind of winged it while looking at a reference picture of the original jacket to see where I wanted my web to lay. Once you're done beading, your jacket is ready to be worn. And that is the making of Seungmin's outfit from the Venom music video. I do want to mention, I'm not doing these in any specific order. I'm not picking like my favorite members or anything. I'm just doing these literally in a random order as I have like, again, because this series I'm trying to get rid of a lot of things in my stash, so I just kind of start working on a cosplay that I already have stuff in my stash for. So there's no specific order to which member comes first in the series. Once again, I hope you guys really liked this video, and I hope I was able to show you something new that maybe you didn't know before or understand before. And I can't wait to see you guys for the next project. Bye bye. No. Karma K.